Track there from the Woolshed Sessions. Lovely track there called Acceptance. Before that was Flight of the Conchords with their funny old track there entitled Angels as well. Time now is 18 minutes away from 8.
The Radio Wammo Breakfast.
The voice of the creative economy.
With Vincent Heeringa.
Yes, Vincent Heeringa from the HB Media stable, Ideologue Magazine, It's Stop Press, NZ Marketing, and a whole lot more as well. G'day there, Vincent.
Good morning.
And we can continue our conversation from last week where we were talking about measuring innovation. But there's been some developments since we've last chatted.
You've got such a good memory, Wammo. I can't remember what I talked about yesterday, let alone last week. But
it's all archived.
We did talk about measuring innovation, and there was a really interesting report by IBM and the University of Auckland kind of comparing the difference between New Zealand and Australia. And, you know, comparing ourselves with Australia is all the rage at the moment amongst economists and business people and government policy wonks. The reason being that people are trying to frame the economic discussion in terms of the trans-Tasman rivalry. There's this kind of desperate attempt to get ordinary people talking about big economic issues, but it's quite dry stuff, and you end up talking about productivity and GDP and the kind of language that most people start falling asleep with. So if you can frame it in terms of trans-Tasman rivalry,
But my problem with that is that it's such an arbitrary measuring device. You know, it's just like, well, let's pick a country. I mean, Australia happens to be right next door, but you know, whatever.
Where it's relevant, I suppose, is that we lose so many of our best and brightest to Australia, including my brother, for instance, who now lives in Perth and has a very good lifestyle and is paid 30% more. And the gap between New Zealand and Australia is, in terms of GDP per head of population, is somewhere between 30 and 40% and growing. And the issue is losing talent, and ultimately, I suppose, if you look at it from a sovereignty point of view, the poorer we become relative to Australia, the more they will own us. So the inbound investment from Australia into New Zealand is quite high, and it's only going in one direction. So New Zealanders are not owning more of Australia. Australians are owning more of New Zealand.
Makes sense, though. We're the size of a city. We're the size of Melbourne, as a country.
There's no excuse. Small people and small nations have achieved a lot. I mean, look at the role that Holland played in the 16th century. It was absolutely all over the world in terms of its shipping and its navy and its commerce. The smallness is not the reason for the difference between Australia and New Zealand, nor is it mining and gold and minerals, as people often say. New Zealand is absolutely dripping with resources. That's not the issue. And this report that's come out this morning from the New Zealand Institute, it's a statement responding to the government's plan to catch Australia by 2025, points out something else. This government seems to put a lot of store on cutting red tape. You must have heard some of that stuff.
Yeah. They were cutting bureaucracy, getting rid of roadblocks.
Exactly. There's too much government this, and there's too much restrictions on that, and we've got to demolish parts of the RMA so people can get on with doing productive things. And that may well be true. I mean, kind of one of the perverse effects of not having decent regulation is you get things like the leaky home syndrome, which is now, going to be costing us in the billions of dollars because we didn't have proper building regulations.
Yeah.
But, that's by the by. Let's assume that we can efficiently and effectively cut red tape and get a more efficient economy. The point that Rick Boven from the New Zealand Institute makes this morning is that Australia has a very similar kind of shaped government in terms of spending. They actually have, their government effectively spends more on their economy and has a bigger role in their economy than New Zealand does. And his point is that's not enough. Cutting red tape is not enough. That doesn't get to the heart of the matter. The big difference between New Zealand and Australia, if you start drilling down, is around productivity. basically they invest more in their businesses, they invest more in their people, and they invest more in innovation, and that results in greater productivity. So for every hour worked by an Australian, they end up with 30% more than every hour worked by a Kiwi.
But that's so much harder, isn't it, Vincent, than cutting red tape?
Yeah, no one's denying how hard this is.
Well, what I'm saying is that we always take the easy road, don't we?
Yeah, I guess so. It's so boring and easy and predictable that a kind of a right-leaning government would do things like, we've got to cut the red tape and we've got to help the farmers. It doesn't actually get to the heart of the problem, which is that for every hour worked, for every piece of land, for every tree cut down, for every moment that you try and spend in productive work, those things have we have to work 30% harder to even just match Australia, and fixing that is the problem. And it's not easy, but that's the very thing that needs the focus of the attention from the government.
Okay, well that's interesting. Be interested to read more of that report as well. But you did want to touch on something else this morning.
Yeah, and by the way, I've just blogged about that online, so if you
great.
want to look at that ideologue.co.nz, you can read my summary of the report, but then obviously it links through to the real thing.
I'm heading in there straight after this.
Exactly. Just really quickly, the latest issue of Marketing magazine is out, and in addition to being fat and gorgeous and lovely, it's got a very interesting piece in there linking creativity in advertising and business performance. And what the author has done is there's a thing in France called the Cannes Lions, the advertising awards, and what he's done is looked at, so these are kind of like these are the Oscars of advertising. So when you win a Cannes Lion, it's like winning an Oscar for advertising. What he's done is he's matched the share market performance of companies that have won a Cannes Lion, and he's found that there is a direct connection. Whether it's causative, that's another question, but the companies that win a Cannes Lion also very quickly thereafter have a stellar performance on the stock exchange. And his point is that creative advertising results from creative leadership, and creative leadership leads to innovation and better performance. So if you want a barometer of who's doing well, look at their advertising.
That's interesting, because I always thought creative advertising was really just for the madmen to get awards. It was not
by
about
madmen.
Well, it wasn't about the client. It was just about getting awards.
Well, that would be a cruel and cynical point of view. And this article is written by someone in advertising. It's written by James Herman from Colenso. So let's take it. There's no hiding where he comes from. But it's a very interesting argument. And when you put Sony, Adidas, Procter & Gamble, Volkswagen, BMW, you put them together, starts making quite an interesting case that there is a association between creative advertising and winning creative awards and then subsequent financial performance.
Well, that's good to hear, Vincent.
Interesting, isn't it?
It is. Thanks very much for letting us know all about it this morning. Cheers.
Pleasure.
Vincent Heeringa, you can find his blog, as he said, up at ideologue.co.nz.